Hi there, this is Danielle from Rough Drafts. If you like our content, please consider giving us a follow. You can listen and watch on Spotify and YouTube. You can listen on Apple. And over on our Patreon, you can see full content, videos, case studies, and much, much more. Go on, click the button to follow along. Buckle up, because this is a long one in the nicest possible way and worth every single minute. Today's guest is Naoise Ó Conchubhair, someone whose entire career has been shaped by an obsession with type, the Irish language, and the conviction that the best design always comes from understanding your context before you touch a single letter form. We go way back to Naoise's childhood, a furniture designer father, a grandfather who founded an Irish language publication, and a mother who was involved in the founding of TG Cahir, our Irish language broadcast channel here in Ireland. We get deep into Insular, the Gaelic typeface Naoise designed for his final year project at NCAD, a project that grew from a mystery tour through Irish banknote lettering, a 1976 typeface competition, and the extraordinary stone cutting lettering of Michael Biggs at the Garden of Remembrance and Arbour Hill. We talk about Song of the Sea and the joy of watching your handwriting appear on the Lighthouse Cinema screen as part of the film, which was nominated for an Oscar. About more modern and recent work, MGNE, where a fada became a brand device, about free market and the Venice Architectural Biennale, the Wonder Cabinet in the Dead Zoo, the National History Museum, and the maddening precision of brass letters that were too perfectly made to fit together. Naoise gives incredible detail of not just the process, the projects, but the people whom he deeply respects and collaborates with, the joy of teaching the new wave of design students, and the changing landscape of operating in design right now. This episode is available to listen to on Apple, but there are so many projects to see. I highly recommend watching the video of the podcast, which is available on Spotify, YouTube, or over on our Patreon. Naoise Ó Conchubhair is the Digital Design Director at Detail Design Studio based here in Dublin, whose practice spans typeface, digital identity, motion, brand systems, UX and front-end design, all in the context of an Irish organisation trying to communicate something authentic about who they are. The question of what makes an Irish digital identity feel right rather than just look right is a design problem that we will explore today. He's been working in Irish design for long enough to have watched a generation of his projects move through the culture and to understand what lasts and what actually doesn't last. In parallel to his professional work, he has maintained strong ties to design education and award initiatives, contributing as a lecturer, a mentor, a jury member across national and international platforms. I had the pleasure of meeting Naoise many years ago as a judge on the ISCD, the International Society of Typographic Design, student assessment, and it was a great experience to be an assessor. But what I did come away with was thinking, wow, Naoise is just such a lovely person. So I'm really looking forward to speaking with him today, and I'm delighted that he has agreed to be on Rough Draft. So welcome, Naoise.
Thanks, Danielle, for that welcome. All of those different things. I just thought I was coming on here to talk about type. Um, we'll get to that, but
Yeah.
yeah, thank you so much. And maybe before I start, congratulations to you on running the Bounce Festival for the last couple of years. Yeah, I think the work that you do with Bounce is really vital. And you kind of started when there was probably a little bit of a lull in the design community in Ireland, and then Bounce just bounced onto the scene, and it's so vibrant and kind of punctuates the design yearly calendar. I think at this stage. So fair play, and thank you for having me.
Oh, it's lovely for you to say that. It's great comments. Thank you. Yeah, so it did actually just bounce onto the scene. People were a bit like, what is this? But now I think people are sure of what it is. And, this podcast is a direct, kind of step from that. So
giving that platform to the Irish design community. It's really important. But you might start at your own beginnings, I guess. So, you know, your own journey into college. I think it's always interesting for people to know how you kind of started off, what inspired you to study design in the first place. And I know you've got quite an interesting family background. So perhaps you might tell us about how that shaped your interests.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting, like when you sit down, you have to kind of think about these things. I suppose for years, the simple answer I could give to this is that my dad is a furniture designer, and his dad, my grandfather, was a craftsperson, a jack of all trades craftsperson. So, they're kind of people who, yeah, even so, my grandfather probably didn't realize even what design was at that stage, but the idea of kind of making and building systems. And I often kind of relate that to, you know, even digital design now, that there's kind of commonality between more kind of primitive making types. But that's the simple answer. But thinking about it a little bit more deeply, on my mother's side, the maternal side, my grandfather would have been a leader in the Irish language movement, and an innovator, and was heavily involved in kind of the modernization of the Irish language, and would have been coming at it, I suppose, from a modernist perspective. He he had a new publishing company in the 50s. Later there was a record label. He was instrumental in the founding of Gaelic. And then a newspaper called Nish, which operated, I think, in the 80s, but the echoes of that are still Irish language publications like Funche. The origins of that come from that. So, not an artist or a creative person or a designer by any means, but definitely kind of a forward thinker. But there's other things, like digging even deeper. I was kind of thinking about it again, like both of my grandmothers worked, which particularly, I suppose, for my grandmother from Cloughan, County Offaly, would have been unusual at the time. So my grandmother ran the post office, which particularly at that time, unfortunately, the post office is now gone. It's subsumed into the petrol station. But at that moment in time, it was central to the community. They had the telephone exchange there. It was probably, thinking back, the first time I saw a computer was in Granny's house. So, yeah, there's all of that, and I suppose back to kind of the simple notion that, you know, my dad is quite creative. Um, there was a jump, I suppose. Then later, my own mother was involved in the founding of TG Cahir, the Irish language TV station, and because of that, like particularly my grandmother's house, it'd be a great place to go. There was always books because of the publishing company. There was all sorts of kind of media and books and magazines, and I remember, like, it was a house full of atlases. So as a potential graphic designer, kind of seeing that stuff and just being able to spend a lot of time there, and I'd say somewhere there is where the jump from kind of the hands-on making and stuff I would have been doing with my dad in the garage at home, the jump happened there. So it's kind of that combination of making, but then communicating, I suppose. And then later, just getting towards kind of thinking about college, as a teenager, the internet was happening when I was that age. And I remember, like, a silly story, but I remember trying to design a magazine, a printed magazine. I got the whole thing done all the way through. And then as a teenager, you realize that, you know, the cost of printing is prohibitive. And this new thing, whatever application I was using at the time, there was like a button to kind of convert your magazine into a website. And that was a penny drop moment, that for free, I suppose, that things that I made or things that I was saying could be published to the whole wide world, with the click of a button. And I think that's the moment that probably kind of set me, woke me up to the idea of studying graphic design. I found my way into the visual communication department in NCAD, and worked there with a lot of amazing tutors and lecturers. I'm thinking of David Carron in particular, who probably set me. We'll talk. I said at the beginning there that will most likely, any conversation with me in design always comes back to type, and it's probably in NCAD that kind of kicked off first. But yeah, that's how I got into college anyway.
Yeah, it's interesting that you're your mother setting up the TG Cahir and the kind of that through line of like the Irish language and then typography kind of finding its way in there, and that
Mm.
mix has kind of underpinned a lot of what you do and a lot of what you did, particularly at the final stages of the degree that you did. And I just like to talk. It's a really good timing now, I guess, because
Mm.
the graduate shows have just kind of finished up. There's a lot of students that are on their summer holidays, but they're coming into final year next year. And I think it's important to kind of mention, that final year project that they're going to come back to do their major project is like
Yeah.
typically 16 weeks of work, and they're not going to get that time to delve into something. But was it a strategic decision for you to pick type for your final year project? Was it something that you thought, okay, this is going to get me or land me the career I want, or was it just that you were really interested to explore type in a greater way?
Um, definitely not deliberate.
Mm.
Um, no, I kind of fell into it. I suppose, yeah. I mentioned NCAD. I did Erasmus actually, which is kind of interesting for to talk about for students now. That opportunity
Mhm.
is there, and it's getting like I know we spend a lot of time in IADT. That's an opportunity that the students have, and that experience for me was transformative. I
Mm.
had the opportunity to go to study in Lahti in Finland, and it's actually there. One of the projects I did in Finland with the type designer Lucas de Groot, was to design a very wonky but complete alphabet typeface. And from there, I was kind of hooked. I think
Mm.
other things, just sort of thinking about talking to you today and kind of thinking about kind of a little bit of navel gazing on my own practice, but there's definitely an element of kind of control freak in me as a designer. I think that's an occupational hazard for a lot of designers. But the way I work, so I'm kind of the way we'll talk maybe a little bit about in web development and coding and things like that. The way I got into those again was just a way and means to actually communicate, like getting in at the nuts and bolts of how it all works, and being able to fully control the message or the form of whatever I was doing. So suddenly, and I suppose even before that, like I was kind of drifting. I was always probably typographically minded without maybe knowing it,
Mm.
but always wanting to kind of. I suppose I was never comfortable with any particular typeface. I was always trying to bend it or modify it a little bit to, just to fit the project or whatever I was trying to convey. So going to Finland and learning how to actually design a typeface from scratch was
Mm.
again kind of intoxicating. This way of kind of, I can fully kind of craft the shape or the look of whatever I'm doing.
Mhm.
So that's the practical part of it. But in
Mm.
terms of the subject matter, again, it was kind of by accident. We've kind of talked a little bit about my upbringing, background in the Irish language, but an important piece I mentioned there was that my grandfather and my mom as well are very much of a modern view of the Irish language, and I
Mm.
suppose the Gaelic alphabet was discontinued by the government by decree in the 60s. So that to me, growing up, and disappearance of kind of Irish pub type always seemed so twee, and it just didn't fit with my I suppose design sensibilities. And it was
Uh-huh.
only in NCAD that I think it was David Caron that put me on to. I went on sort of a mystery tour. It was the lettering on the B series Irish banknotes. Got me really interested. If you have a look at it, it's kind of this very, there's a modernity to it that I'd never seen
Mm.
before in a Gaelic letter form.
Mhm.
And I went to try and figure out where that came from. And in a roundabout way, it was a conversation with David Caron that sent me to the Kilkenny Design Workshop library, pointed me towards the type competition. I think it was 1976, Design an Irish Typeface, and there's a typeface there by William Curran, who is actually another person of note at the moment. I wasn't particularly aware of William Curran's work, that looks a little bit like the typeface on the banknote type, but it's actually not. It's not it. And finally, I managed to track it down to a designer, craftsperson called Michael Biggs,
Mm.
who now, in hindsight, his work is all, yeah, it's all over. So Michael Biggs cut the lettering at the Garden of Remembrance, and up in Arbour Hill, which is probably his masterpiece. It's the proclamation in both languages in, I don't know, it's like a 50-foot wide wall. It's incredible if you've never seen
Mhm.
it. And again, that was just eye opening.
Mhm.
And you can see, just as I'm kind of talking about this is the rabbit hole I was kind of going down. And I suppose I was definitely interested. I wrote my thesis on kind of a related topic, was kind of the iconography of the GAA. So I was definitely kind of waking up, I suppose, to forms of modernity within kind of Irish design and the Irish language that I wasn't fully aware of. But
Mhm.
the degree project started more as, I suppose, I wouldn't say a homage, but more as a research piece. And I began by I digitized the lettering in the Garden of Remembrance. And again, I suppose, this kind of control freak thing. I was like, yeah, like that. I was kind of, yeah, that's good, but it's not my voice. And suddenly from that, it just spiraled into, I suddenly was drawing like that. Yeah, these shapes that are definitely inspired by Biggs, but
Mhm.
I was in a great class in NCAD, and yeah, I'm kind of talking about the academic staff there who were amazing, but there was also a group of people there, like I'm thinking of Sean
Mhm.
Montwee and Rob Farley, and Andrew McNamee, who went on to found Post, and we were all just obsessed with with type, but
Mhm.
modern type, and
Mhm.
there's things that they, we were all kind of uh, working off each other's side to keep pushing each other forward. And it was probably more that kind of that modern conversation that
Mhm.
more so influenced where that typeface ended up being. But yeah, look, I suppose that's a very, very long-winded way of saying how I got there. And then you were
Mhm.
asking, I suppose, was it a deliberate decision? It
Mhm.
absolutely wasn't. And I've given that same piece of advice that you're almost sort of saying there to students, is that you should try and be strategic. Find something you're
Yeah.
interested in. Find something that's that'll resonate. Which is again what happened with Insular. It just piqued people's interest, and I kind of went on a mystery tour based on that project. Sure, I'm still talking about it now, nearly 20 years later.
Yeah.
Um, but I do often give that advice to students, is
Mhm.
try and do that. But I know, as I'm saying it, like, it's easier said than done. I definitely
Yeah.
didn't do it deliberately.
Mm.
It just kind of came as a natural part of whatever my design thinking was at that time. Um,
Mhm.
but if you are a designer that can control things better than I can, yeah, absolutely.
Mhm.
I'd be pursuing things like that, because yeah, it's extraordinary where it leads you.
Yeah.
Don't think I'd be where I am. I don't think I'd be practicing and doing what I do without
Mhm.
that project.
Mm. And you're kind of, you were mentioning there about, like, your grandfather's kind of rejection of this kind of twee type
Mm,
sign
yeah.
and this stuff. So that kind of rejection of the kind of romanticized Irish script in favor of kind of something that was more modern. Where did that sensibility come from? Or was it just that you had this one click to a website understanding and thought, well, that's not going to work online? Did that kind of start to flavor your view a little bit, that what does and doesn't work on screen? Or was it something else? Or was it just a matter of taste?
Um, in terms of shaping the letter forms, it was definitely, and still is a display typeface. That's again the lovely thing about
Mhm.
having this conversation. I was going through kind of the archives, and I was looking at Illustrator files from 2009. I found I was like, looking at stuff, and
Illustrator 1.
Illustrator one, God knows, yeah. But yeah, so it wasn't, there was no grand master plan. It was just making something. I suppose the brief to myself for what I was trying to achieve was something that felt kind of graphically new and fresh, and was inherently Irish, but without
Mm.
without any of that baggage that goes with
Mm.
some of the more traditional typefaces. But
Yeah.
again, like there is like that there's you know, you're I'm kind of building on something there that certainly wasn't the first. Like other stories that I was looking at was the work of Colm O'Loughlin, who designed the Colm Killa typeface, and
Mhm.
that was designed, I think, in the 1920s. But all of the same ideas that I'm talking about,
Mhm.
probably to a much higher standard, in that that's a typeface that's still, you know, the FAI were using it. That's a really successful attempt, I suppose, at modernizing the Irish character. Um,
Mhm.
so, but yeah, back to the idea of, yeah, I'm saying I was kind of obsessed with web at the time, but web really didn't enter my thinking in relation to that project. It probably isn't terribly legible down at small sizes. It's very much for use kind of big and large, big and bold, and kind of makes a statement.
Mhm. And then I suppose just to track your career, so leaving that project behind, leaving Insular
Yeah.
behind, and then, entering the industry, what was your first port of call?
Um, so I suppose there's two threads to that in terms of where Insular led me. We'll talk a little bit about my kind of teaching and academic work,
Mhm.
but in a sense, um, I did get a job in industry straight away. But the other weird thing that happened to me was that I was sort of thrown into academic circles really early on.
Mm.
The team in academic staff at TU Dublin were and have always been so generous to me over the years. And I think round about the time I finished college, Marianne Bulger and Claire Bell were curating the A Type I conference here. I got to contribute to that in kind of a
Mhm.
small way, and then later the same team set up Face Forward exhibition, where I did actually present a peer reviewed paper on a related topic on research I did on Pust logo. That was much more research led. But
Mm.
I've always kind of been involved in academic, and that's kind of where that started.
Mhm.
In terms of actually working in a studio, and sort of a different thread of my creative practice was that I got an internship in a web agency called Arquivo straight out of college. A
Mhm.
guy called Mark Casey picked me up there through the Air Spider Awards, which is still operating to this day. But that was huge. Like, and you have to remember that was peak economic crash. So to kind of come out of college
Yeah.
and this guy offering you a job like that again, like it is a different thread of thought. But so my practice has kind of drifted into digital design and development, and the work that I did in Arquivo, who still to this day are like they're a large scale web agency I was working with. Again, like similar to the academic thing, just being thrown in at the deep end. I was working with
Yeah.
the Department of the Taoiseach, working with DAA, lots of big clients. Who else? There was IBEC, and like kind of work of that scale, like very corporate. But all of kind of I was, when I was in there, I was just learning. I was like a sponge. I was sort of trying to soak it all up.
Mm.
All of the things that I didn't learn in, like the nature. Even today, we're teaching graphic design. It's not that's the things, search engine optimization, development servers, all of that stuff. I was kind of picking up in Arquivo.
Yeah.
But they're definitely, and again, like things that are still still to this day, like the web agency. I've always sort of, I'm still in touch with people in Arquivo. It's a brilliant time there, and there's a whole cohort of companies operating in Dublin who are kind of the web industry, and they don't
Mhm.
talk to the graphic design industry, which is the fence that I jumped over after. So
Yeah.
I spent a year and a half or something. I kind of graduated to having a full time job there, and then luckily a conversation with Mel O'Rourke in CI Studio Creative Inc. It was at the time.
Mhm.
I ended up getting a job there, and I suppose I kind of jumped the fence into design studio land. It's a
Mhm.
different group of people.
Mm.
Um, but yeah, so like, yeah, that's probably the origins, and kind of how not by design, but that project kind of sent my merry way, and yeah, teed me up, and I spent an amazing, I think it was 5 years in 5 amazing years in Creative Inc. So yeah.
Yeah. Amazing. And yeah, that the Face Forward was brilliant. It was such a great event. I loved everything about that. It was fantastic. So I'm glad you mentioned it. And it's funny that you're talking about like the silo of, the web companies that don't talk to the design companies. It's just like I'm sick of hearing about silos. We need to break them all down.
Yeah.
We all need to just work together. But I suppose then your next project that I'd love to kind of talk about, and we have a clip, is the beautiful story of a young Irish boy called Ben and his sister Saoirse, who can transform into a seal. That's no spoiler alerts there. It's not giving away anything, but it's a beautiful story. And I think it won and was nominated for 100 countless awards across the world. Song of the Sea, and you had the opportunity to develop the typeface for that. So before you speak about that, we'll just watch a little clip of that.
This is an ancient shell that my mother gave me a long time ago. Hold it to your ear and listen carefully. You will hear the song of the sea. Keep listening.
Between the north, between the
Yeah, like that's going back again, kind of digging into the archives, kind of having a look through. I suppose let's not forget that the nature of the talk today is kind of rough draft. So I was trying to find the origins of that. But again, like just before kind of speaking about it again, like just the opportunity to work on that at whatever stage I was in my career, like it was still only kind of starting out. But yeah, I suppose the faith and the trust that Mel put in me to work on that. And I wasn't working. We'll talk a little bit about collaboration, especially. I suppose the older you get and the bigger the projects you get, it's all collaborative, the first little bits we're talking about, college projects, it's sort of singular work, but probably everything from that point onwards is, there's multiple cooks involved. But at the same time, we came up with this notion of trying to, I suppose, speak in the voice of, so that you mentioned it there, there's two characters, we've Ben and Saoirse. So and actually, sorry, what wasn't even that, it was so Saoirse transformed into a silky. So we had Saoirse Hand, which was kind of the child's voice, and then a more calligraphic letter form, which again it was found that one was found and customized, should kind of say that, but that was we called that silky script, and it was kind of that interplay of something quite kind of a very kind of crude letter form. It was like, obviously a child wouldn't necessarily be able to draw to that level, but we kind of wanted to sort of imbue that sort of sense of it kind of being childish, and that it was the child's own voice, and yeah, other things kind of jumping out of the kind of comfort zone a little bit. Like I'm very much, you kind of mentioned sort of modernism and things being quite maybe sparse and minimal a lot of the time. So something that was very much hand drawn. I was kind of looking at photos there. The genesis of that typeface is something we kind of scribbled in the studio. Now there were what I'd kind of forgotten about looking through the archival material, that there was a moment where it was going to be a little bit more of a kind of a Gothic typeface. We were, the brief was open. It didn't have to be a typeface. But I think, yeah, just once we kind of hit on the Saoirse Hand typeface, we all kind of got a bit excited about that, and then ran with it from there. Like again, like lovely things about. So I should mention as well, like the collaboration obviously was with Cartoon Saloon, whose movie it was. So the trust and the kind of collaboration there to get to see a rough draft of a full feature film. So we watched in order to sort of inform the design process. We saw a draft of where it hadn't been colored yet. So a line drawing rough cut of the full movie, which we watched,
Right.
which was lovely.
Mm.
And yeah, from there, just like I suppose, yeah, like something like a movie, it kind of just has all these outputs. But the main thing, I suppose, was doing the title sequence. And yeah, doing a piece of work like that where we got to go. We went to the Lighthouse Cinema, and we saw like seeing your handiwork up on a big screen is kind of a thrill. But you kind of, yeah, you keep moving, and it's not something I reflect on very much. It's only kind of when somebody asks. And but it did pop up recently. It's back on Netflix. And again, just seeing, like, it's like, oh my god, there's my handwriting essentially on a little Netflix thumbnail. Yeah, it's cool. And I don't think, like, I suppose, maybe there's kind of bits of advice to students or young designers when you're in the thick of that. I don't, like, I'm kind of looking back, and we're talking about it kind of fondly now. When I was in the thick of it, I didn't fully appreciate
Yeah.
what I was doing, the significance of it, like, to be working on a movie that was, like, it was nominated for an Oscar, didn't win the Oscar, unfortunately. But yeah, to kind of contribute to that, and to contribute to a company like Cartoon Saloon, who are just, yeah, like, globally recognized, and making work that no other animation studio in the world can kind of keep up with. That was something very special. And the other thing, actually, just as a side note, that kind of came out of the drawer when I was looking at back over the sketches for Song of the Sea, was the actual Cartoon Saloon identity itself. So their logo, which, as it transpires, was the last thing I worked on in Creative Inc. before making my next professional hop. But it was rejected. It's one of my favorite little marks that I ever did, and I thought it was perfect, because a lot of the Cartoon Saloon movies have these little blinking eyes, and the double O in the word cartoon, and I thought, like, I genuinely thought I nailed it. And sent it off. I unfortunately didn't. Maybe I'm persuasive in real life. I didn't get to present it, and it was flat rejected. And I don't know what. So it was. Again, actually, something to say out loud. I met the CI Studio gang recently. They were celebrating 30 years on the road, which is like, what an extraordinary achievement. And I met Phil, who Phil Mitten, who's since moved on to set up Opposite Studio. But it was Phil that actually finished it. And if you look at the version I did and the version Phil did, there's definitely a similarity. But the version Phil did found favor, and is still in use today. It doesn't have the blinking eyes, but the kind of the core concept is there.
You don't seem sore about that at all. No, it's actually it's really playful. It is really playful. It actually reminds me of Comedy Central. They kind of do a lot of really kind of playful things with their identity as well.
Yeah.
But actually, it's funny, because you've mentioned that you like to control things, and and then you're kind of putting a spin on this kind of playful identity, and the blinking, and, like, the little kind of nuanced nudges and things. How do you think that playfulness, and then, I suppose, maybe the opposite of playfulness could be seen as kind of rigor? How do you kind of bring the two together, or in your controlling mind as such? Like, how do you kind of reconcile that?
I think something that I was thinking about in prepping for today was, I definitely, when I was in college, I was definitely kind of a modernist, very strict modernist, international kind of style mold. And in a way, going back to the Insular project, that's still a bit kind of po-faced, but it's definitely stepping away into sort of designing. And I think I kind of realized later in college, maybe the Finnish experience, and definitely later on, is that great design, like truly great design, comes from designing for context. You don't bring I kind of find, the more I kind of delve into it, I find kind of the modernist doctrine a little bit broken. There's parts of it that I agree with. Like the other another bugbear of mine, sort of just on that kind of thought, is that people we talk a lot about minimalism, or people outside of the design world talk about minimalism, and that minimalism, kind of reducing things to their to the bare minimum, to me is just good design. It's not, what they're describing is good design. It's not there is such thing as minimal design, but generally when people are talking about minimalism, it's just kind of good pure design. And it's about, I suppose, boiling things down to their essence, but also kind of reading the brief and designing for the context. Like you could do the best Helvetica modernist logo for a company like Cartoon Saloon, but like it would fall flat. They're not a corporation. You're speaking mainly to kids, and that's kind of the target audience. And you want something that resonates with whatever that audience might be, resonates with kids. You want the viewer to be able to kind of see themselves in the work, or to be able to engage with it. It needs to speak the language of whoever's looking at it. So I suppose, like I definitely left those very strict doctrines behind a long time ago. But it does, and maybe the reason, just for kind of talking about minimalism, like kind of separating that from, like, modernism is not minimalism. They're different things, and you can have design that's very expressive, but that is also minimal, that is reductive, that is efficient with the marks you're making. So I think that kind of that colors the approach to Cartoon Saloon, and it colors my approach to any topic, I suppose. Some of my later work is maybe a little bit more serious, because again, the target audiences were serious. We kind of moved on to the work we do in detail is generally always kind of in some way kind of culturally or socially connected, and that brings with it a particular vocabulary. So work we've done with IMA, or with kind of the big corporates, we've worked with Twitter and things like that. That brings with it its own language, and as a designer, to be versatile, to be functional, you need to be able to move with that, and not get wrapped up in trying to put strict kind of containers on it. And I realize the contradiction in me saying that, in that I am quite kind of controlling in how I approach my design. But I think designing for context is probably the key to all of that.
And I think that's the great challenge of good design, is that reductiveness, but still have an expression, is what good design is, and I think it can be kind of difficult to separate that from, as you said, like, just make it Helvetica, nice and simple, you know what I mean? Like, and just and kind of saying, well, that's the same. They're completely different because of, as you say, because of context, and because of experience as well. And you do need to work within those institutions who have that weight behind them, and that's maybe that seriousness. But I think from looking through your work, I think what you've managed to do is create really clear systems, really kind of structured systems, but that have a little bit of interplay. Some of them have the addition of a little bit of motion, but like in general, even the typographic solutions, you can see they have the ability to move. They have the type itself has a rhythm and a pace, so it's not just this kind of static, minimalist or minimal design. It's done in a very craftsmanship way, if that's the way of explaining it. So it has a sense of personality, which I absolutely adore. I think that's the challenge of designing with little, but designing so much with little is actually really, really difficult. But just to pick up on your point about your minimalist kind of approach, and yes, your links and your background and being thrown into design education, do you feel that design education is doing enough to teach other design histories, maximalism and bringing in other, maybe non-traditional styles,
Yeah.
periods, designers, etc. What do you think?
That's a big question. And I
Mm.
don't know if I'm fully qualified to speak to that really, in that I'm only my academic practice has probably expanded a little bit lately, but I'm not probably on the coal face to be able to answer that properly. But definitely I know the the mindset in the institutions that I am connected to. So between IEDT in particular, but TU and NCAD as well. There is definitely a very broad set of practitioners there and ideas, um,
Mhm,
but it's difficult. I suppose you have to kind of balance. You can't run before you can walk.
mhm,
There is an importance to teaching some of those, the more obvious parts of design as kind of the foundation blocks before you start jumping off.
mhm,
Um, so yeah, but definitely more and more we're so conscious as teachers to try and represent everybody, represent every voice. I know for sure the classes even in themselves are becoming more diverse in the types of students that are taking on graphic design. So that in itself determines kind of the need to represent every facet you possibly can, without, I suppose, that like we're into something really interesting there with kind of any type of teaching, but particularly kind of design teaching is
mhm,
kind of how do you teach kind of comprehensively? How do you show a student everything they need to know without overwhelming them and losing them along the way?
mhm,
So that's always kind of a tightrope you walk as a teacher. Is always like, I suppose my philosophy with teaching is always trying to encourage and try and um, I, I suppose guide students. Thinking of my own kind of student experience and thinking back on kind of the teachers that were of most consequence to me, that they didn't say you must read this or you must look at this,
mhm,
but they just gently they pushed me in that general direction. And I suppose the best learning, I think, comes from the things you're kind of interested in. So if we can just sort of guide the students to roughly where they're meant to be, and putting all the things in front of them, and almost allowing them to to find what's of most interest to them.
mhm.
um so yeah, but look, I'll finish that by saying that I'm only kind of only still learning as a design teacher.
Mhm.
um but it's definitely like it's a really good question. You can see how we've kind of drifted from a simple question of
Yeah.
how, what do you show them to how you teach. So yeah.
Yeah. And I think you're right. I mean, I think just setting the scene for and allowing the space for curiosity and that guidance. It's as much really as you can do in some cases. You can't
Yeah.
show everything, but
Yeah.
the steps then and the I suppose the process, because bounce is all about the process, and
Mm.
the steps in which you take. So your career and the jobs that you work on move between type and UX, emotion and identity, and in and
Mm.
out, kind of weaving, bobbing and weaving in and out of everything. Um, when you're shifting between those kind of gears,
Yeah.
what does your process look like, and has it evolved since you've kind of started to work with detail?
So, yeah, look, I think for me, the way I've always managed to kind of jump the fence into these different disciplines is type, and just having kind of a strong, a deep understanding, I suppose, of type, and again, the idea of context, like what being able to change. We were kind of talking more about kind of the message in terms of kind of twisting or bending type, but also kind of in terms of legibility, or typefaces that are suitable for a digital context, suitable for accessible contexts. So being able to kind of change from much more kind of, we talked about kind of things like Song of the Sea, which is very kind of expressive and kind of speaks to children, whereas then you move into kind of municipal projects where you need to serve a much broader range of people and abilities. So being able to approach that through type, I suppose is always my way in. Image making is kind of part of it, and I suppose the lovely thing about working in detail is that we kind of we're a collective, and we all have our different strengths. So there's a particular strength for kind of illustration in the studio. Definitely kind of thinking about Paul McBride and people like Sally who worked with us in the past. So being able to kind of to dovetail each other's work is really a big part of the practice. It's kind of very often that I'll have sketched things, particularly kind of do a lot of icons, and I'll often, as part of an identity, I'll kind of sort of sketch icons, get a bit of the feel of it, but I'll hand it over to Paul, who knows how to finish it to a really, really high standard. So being able to kind of rely on each other that way, and then equally, I suppose, as kind of the token type designer in the studio, I often find myself maybe drawing the final they might not be my projects, but I often find myself kind of drawing the final versions of different projects. But like that in itself is kind of I suppose kind of as you grow as a designer, as you get more senior, you have to kind of be able to kind of not even delegate, but you can't have your hands on everything anymore. But it's like the again that collaborative process within our studio of being able to work with, we've an amazing young team. We've Ollie Smith and Jess Whelan, both IEDT graduates, working with them at the moment, like being able to I suppose just be able to, it's not even helping, it's kind of give them the confidence sometimes to tackle, and in the same way Paul might be able to support kind of the younger designers in the studios approaching image making. They're amazing identity designers, and just being able to kind of give them the confidence to be kind of go for it, don't worry about it, get the feel of it down, and if you need a hand, just kind of fine tuning it, or being able to kind of look over the shoulder and kind of say, it just a tiny little bit wider here, it's a lovely way to work. And I think that's kind of the power. I think I touched on it already there, like this idea of kind of the collective and collaboration. I don't think, again, the bigger the projects get, there's no project at any kind of quality at a large scale that doesn't happen through collaboration, and to do those projects, being able to work with other, and I'm just talking about the studio, like it's outside of that, it's the clients we work with and the supplier, like again, like once we do a lot of kind of large scale environmental design and fit out design, being able, we're not fabricating things in the studio, being able to work with our suppliers to get large scale work done. I think underpins from kind of in a really small way to large ways, definitely kind of the underpinnings of the studio or studio in detail and how we operate.
It's brilliant because the collaboration piece is just like, it's so vital, because the work just wouldn't be what it is without that, and without those voices like that. You're saying, you're just kind of, you're throwing your eye as such onto, the identity or some letters, and you're kind of going, I can redraw them and just, I'll help tweak that. But everyone has that thing, you might be the token type guy, but everyone has the thing that they're bringing to the party as such. And that's the kind of the secret sauce, isn't it? That kind of collaborative piece. And you would love that, more people collaborate, even, if it's kind of challenging to do that in terms of, because there's a lot of freelancers that kind of work on their own. It's so valuable, and it's just such
people ask me, and I, like, you could ask me like how many people work for detail, And I
Yeah.
always struggle. There is a core team, obviously, that are in the studio day in, day out, but where there's a blur of some of our very close collaborators, like
Mm.
my professional husband Billy, our backend developer, works primarily from Valencia. In the
Mm.
early days of Detail, he was rarely home. I didn't. I became very close friends with Billy, having never met him in real life. I think there was maybe 4 years, could be more, of like knowing this guy. And that was maybe kind of developed through COVID as well. So I would have been working from home and doing these remote calls. My wife, Sarah, got to know Billy really well. Knew what each other's houses and apartments or whatever looked like. I mean, we never met each other in real life. And eventually, obviously, the day came, and I remember we went on a date. We went to for a pizza in Dunleary, and it was just the most bizarre experience of somebody like I know you inside out, but now
Yeah.
you're here in real
Yeah.
life, and it's kind of like, yeah, it's sort of weird, but it's not weird. Like, it's just you, like, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah, from there, like, Billy's back and forth a little bit more now, and yeah, we get to see a bit of him. But just sort of to speak to this nature of, so we work with kind of copywriters and fabricators and illustrators and stuff, and yeah, so the detail team is kind of hard to quantify because of exactly this kind of collaborative nature of our practice.
Yeah. Their tentacles are everywhere.
Something like that. Yeah.
So then we might talk about another one of your projects, MGNE fada. And for those who are listening beyond
Yeah.
Ireland, the fada
Yeah.
is an elongation of the sound, and I think that's all it does. But I could be corrected on that. But it's the little diagonal line
The diagonal
above a
line,
letter. Yeah.
same, and serves a similar job to the French language. So
Yes,
eh
exactly.
becomes a.
Yes.
It does. You're right. It elongates the sounds. But yeah, like that's a lovely project to
Mm.
bring up, in that it sort of dovetails like that kind of like kind of contemporary practice, a recent project.
Mm.
So that was I suppose I don't want to call it a rebranding. It was kind of a repositioning of McGarry Nieni, architects studio. So that MG&E, that they've retired. So there was a transition in the company. So I suppose they were trying to show a continuity with their past, but also kind of point to a new future under a new leadership. So they were very conscious to try and kind of retain the name, but change. So we've gone to kind of the acronym, but I suppose we kind of hijacked the father, or the accent, as the device, I suppose, to kind of communicate the continuity part of it. But again, like, lovely thing about having the chat today, Danielle, is to go back. You asked me to go into the drawer and kind of have a look at it, and trying to remember exactly kind of how
Mm.
we landed at the particular identity that we ended up with, which does definitely have, as it happens, Nieni is a relative of mine, so there was a personal connection there as well. So yeah, but we definitely started kind of this kind of interplay of kind of modern and maybe traditional, or kind of context, was definitely very evidently at play. And if you kind of look at some of the early drafts for this, we kind of started looking at very kind of engineered letter forms, as kind of looking at the work of Florian Karsten, and his typeface, which we kind of customized a little bit. But it was too extreme. Like, it just didn't suit, again, like trying to tool everything to its context and the type of work. So we were just looking at the type of work that MGNE do, and it's very kind of cultural. They do a lot of schools, and there's kind of, I suppose, a softness to it. They're not heavy duty and engineering. That's not their tone of voice, but it was a very useful experiment. The other thing I was obsessed with at the time was I'm always obsessed with Adrian Frudiger. He's a typographic hero of mine, but I was particularly obsessed with his typeface icon at the time. So it's kind of a flared serif, and kind of there's a sense of kind of that builds on things like kind of Albertus, and a very kind of calligraphic hand. So we kind of did a version of that, but again, that was a little bit too kind of looks a bit like kind of bell bottoms, or kind of just wasn't that also wasn't quite right, and we kind of went down the rabbit hole, I suppose, of kind of ultimately kind of drawing our own letter forms, and there's kind of there's a slant, I suppose, to how that's drawn. I again kind of going back to things I learned early on, like how to render type. When I'm sketching in my notebook, I generally I kind of scribble in a diagonal line, which kind of mimics a pen tip, and you can kind of see, if you look at where we ended up with that, there's sort of there's kind of a diagonal in it that kind of creates motion. The bit, I suppose, we lifted from the early experiment was that something interesting was happening, that the Florian Karsten typeface kind of has this pixelated notion to it. But in a similar way, we kind of hit on this idea of the twist in the letter form. And we picked out there's a symmetry between the tail, or the bottom part of the G, and the folded over fada, which is much larger than a normal fada would be. But that we kind of thought that that was enough. That was kind of iconic in itself. You kind of have this nice arc that kind of sums them up. And I think really what I hope it does, or kind of communicates, is that there is still that sense of engineering, that twist isn't calligraphic, it's a little bit more engineered, and we kind of then reread the full alphabet to try and inject that kind of more engineered twist. So it kind of has that sort of slightly traditional feel, definitely kind of nods to Gaelic and Irishness, but with kind of very modern feel. And then from there, like I think that's an example of something that's quite minimal without being kind of modernist. It has a tone of voice, but all of the rest of the applications are just kind of just so. And then like other things kind of that struck me about, like as graphic designers, sometimes we're kind of taught, like I kind of alluded to some much bigger, larger scale projects there, but sometimes it's the simplest thing. And the business card, and again, actually collaboration. I remember I didn't actually finish that project. I had designed the stuff, but I know Brian actually did the artwork for the business cards, and it's probably one, like that year definitely was kind of the favorite thing I did. It's just a simple business card. We embossed the fada symbol, and it's just kind of a lovely thing. And I kind of talk about that sometimes to the students, that like sometimes the satisfaction of designers, they're the littlest things that other people might kind of find trivial, but that lovely output of that project. But I suppose like kind of I think you asked me at some point, like, how does the work maybe I did at the very my work on Insular and kind of communicating Irishness, that still bubbles to the surface, and that was definitely one of those projects where you're kind of trying to speak in kind of an Irish tone of voice, but there's also other factors that you're trying to, again, never letting it feel pastiche or you're looking to the past. That it's always looking to the future, but knowing and understanding and building on that history is I kind of think I'd like to think how you get to that type of work.
Yeah, I think it's a really elegant solution, and I'm glad you mentioned that. It kind of harks back to your kind of beginnings, because it has a real feel of that kind of sculptural quality that Michael Bay had in the letter cutting. You can almost see the lines where he would have probably cut away at the stone, or the wood, through the type. So it really does kind of it's almost like that kind of full circle project. It's kind of like, this is how far I've come.
Yeah.
And wasn't I right all along? Do you know what I mean?
Definitely.
We might move on to another project, and this is really, I suppose, the free market project. And You sent me lots of found typography, which I think
Mm.
are just wonderful. And it's you mentioned Paul McBride. I love his Instagram page, Typo Dublin.
Yeah.
Just all the beautiful examples all around the city, and I love looking at them and just trying to guess where they're from before I actually
Yeah.
read them. But so that project then that became a bit of a repurposing project. You might speak a little bit about that.
Yeah. Well, yeah. We'll get to that. I suppose it's important just to explain what free market was, and
Mm.
even before, like starting with this idea of collaboration, it just keeps coming up. The images that research you're talking about was actually done by Trevor Finnegan of Revert Design. So this project was very much kind of a collective. So it was the Irish entry to the Venice Biennale in 2018 in. Which was also the year that Ireland itself was curating the entire exhibition. So, Shelley in Grafton Architects would have been curating the show. So it was, it was kind of momentous and scary almost to be part of. But we were invited to be part of the group of architects running it, and Lawrence Lord and Jeffrey Bolius, who've been AP&E architects. They've been great kind of collaborators of ours on different projects. They invited us to be involved to help them. I suppose they it was the architects themselves who were kind of leading the idea, but helped them, I suppose, realize that or visualize it. But the train of thought that they were on at that moment in time was, so the idea was reclaiming the Irish town square. So if you kind of think and think about a lot of kind of satellite towns of Dublin or kind of small towns around Ireland in the past, the market square would have been the kind of the heartbeat, the thriving heart of those places. Now, unfortunately, if you know any of those places, they're generally all car parks. The life has kind of gone out of the centre of the towns, and it's out kind of in the Tesco or whatever, in the kind of the outskirts of the town. So, the idea was there was to kind of start thinking about just that idea, waking people up to that idea, and then coming up with solutions or ideas as to how we might reclaim our town squares. So. Yeah, again, kind of the way projects like that unfold, you need some sort of a catalyst. And there's an image of Veronica Broderick's hairdressers, I think it's in Abbeyfield in Kerry. I pass it often on my way down west, which has this just mad colour scheme, weird kind of purple mosaic and like raging orange shop front signage, and it's just such a kind of so uniquely Irish and just unique in general, and we all kind of gravitated towards that image, and that was so in the architecture itself. So the exhibition setup, the team recreated that mosaic, and then we were kind of tasked with kind of coming up with the identity and really kind of looking at the lettering, and there was a couple of options on it, but again, nice thing about kind of diving into the archives, it was actually Owen Cummins, who was working for us in detail at the time, who did the initial sketch for free market. I unearthed it. I had actually taken the lead on a different proposal, and again, things you mentioned to me before the talk, like kind of things that ones that got away or things that were just flat rejected. It was nice to see it, but I can also see what it was in kind of Owen's direction that they liked. But again, as happens with these projects, it kind of got as the type designer, it was sort of handed over to me to try and make sense of it. There was kind of a long design process back and forth. Like lovely, again, like just lovely conversations within the studio itself, and then with the kind of the wider curatorial panel, and we came up with this kind of just bizarre, like Owen's lettering to begin with was bizarre, and it probably got even more bizarre as it kind of went. This sort of something kind of, again, these ideas of kind of challenging tradition and something that feels modern, and it's kind of almost like a gradient. So we drew kind of the full alphabet or full letter form, and and there's a version which is kind of plain. There was a version which was quite extreme, so fully kind of vectorized, a non-curve version, and then there was one sort of somewhere in between where we kind of just chamfered. It was the curved letter form with the chamfers, and again, I suppose in that gradient of what kind of found favor, we all kind of gravitated towards the middle version of the typeface that we ultimately called Broderick after Veronica Broderick's hairdressers. And yeah, like that again, like to be thrown into something like that, I'm kind of saying that I'm a type designer, but you know, I kind of more like we go back to threads of kind of things. My grandfather is a jack of all trades. I do a bit of everything. So to be tasked with doing a full typeface for that project was exciting, and then ultimately, I suppose, yeah, to see that start to kind of come to life. So that became a newspaper. We did a whole lot of like, Ross Phelan was also in the studio at the time. He did some beautiful publications. I'd be remiss of me not. I don't know how we've got this far in the talk, and for me not to mention Keith Byrne, who is my longtime colleague in the studio. He's currently our creative director, and Keith would have led again a lot of kind of the creative outputs on that. But then it drifted into things I was working on the actual production of the lettering. So getting that stuff fabricated, getting it over to, it was built here, getting it over to Italy, and I suppose the lovely thing about that project. So that's kind of a very potted history of the creative genesis of it. But you kind of mentioned this thing about kind of conversations and echoes of things like looking back, what remains, and that's a great example of a project that started a conversation. The Free Market project, it exhibited in Venice, but then we brought it back, and there was a kind of an All Ireland roadshow where we brought it around. But the actual thread of conversation is still going, and it's lovely to sort of see, you know, this idea of kind of working on things that ultimately other designers come and contribute to. So the recent exhibition, The Reason of Towns, curated by the IAF, and designed by Eamon Hall in design department. It's not a studio. It's amazing to see. So that's still kind of that same thread of thought is kind of echoing to this day. And if you get a chance to look at that Reason of Towns exhibition, it's phenomenal. Like it's its own language and has become its own thing. But nice to kind of think of a project like that kind of continues, that you contributed in a very small way to a broader conversation that's still going on to this day, and something very, very worthy. And I think, you know, there are, again, like there's very tangible outputs from that. There's a lot of towns now where there's been a couple of really great. I think Mullingar has a new centrepiece in their town, and there's a lot of kind of practical outcomes from the project, as well as kind of the academic conversation that kind of permeates around it.
Yeah. And I think it's so important that you're part of that conversation, that you're aiming, as a practitioner, you're aiming to make work that kind of contributes to culture, or to starting a conversation, within a community, to develop, like, that kind of cultural continuity, to kind of open up a dialogue. I think it's something that maybe was the ambition, of, graduates 10 years ago, maybe, that they would eventually get to that point. But I think what's lovely now is that that's the immediate ambition of a lot of graduates coming out. They want to work on projects of purpose and intent, and they're really interested in that. And I think, this project is a fantastic example of that, and opening and starting that dialogue. And that, not that you'd engage in these projects for any type of egocentric reason, or to kind of have a legacy as such, but isn't it wonderful that these types of projects can actually do that? They can live beyond your touch of them, and they can kind of go into communities and areas and have a voice and a life of their own.
Absolutely. And yeah, I think we were both at the Better by Design conference yesterday, uh,
Mm.
which was, yeah, like an extraordinary thing. There's something extraordinary in general going on in deeper, the Department of Expenditure, under the leadership of Trevor Vaughan. And back
Mhm.
to, I suppose, my experiences in IDT, I had the opportunity, I suppose, again, if I didn't mention Rob at the beginning of the conversation, Rob was part of Post Design Studio, but he's found his way into government. So a graphic
Mhm.
designer working within government, like what an extraordinary thing! Like that is that's so exciting to see
Mm.
here. But during the year, Rory Bradley and myself had our third year professional practice students do a workshop with Rob and Genevieve from the department, where we were, I suppose, again thinking about the conversation yesterday. The remit of Deeper is kind of the full gamut of kind of life events from birth to marriage to death. But for as you know yourself, trying to keep a project focused, we focused on the student experience,
Mhm.
and with that we had four teams working on different aspects of the student experience. So like the experience of a first time college goer, mature student, somebody trying to switch courses, and the outcomes that they came up with were just again so refreshing. Those in the same way in industry and in practice, like the students themselves are used to kind of working on, I suppose, fixed outcomes or designing
Mhm.
maybe a website to a high fidelity, and some of the really interesting conversations we had with the students was that this is a different type of design. You're not, this is a short 5-week workshop. We're not designing a full website. We're not designing a campaign. This is about advocating to government to make small changes that can make a big difference, and you need to kind of articulate how this idea could work, how easy it might be to do it, and the benefit that it might have. And I
Mhm.
suppose it's a different framing of design. You're looking at it from a different lens, which was refreshing even for me. To
Mhm.
you're designing kind of sketches of the different outputs.
Yeah.
But what we also got to was that, so we spent the majority of the project, all of the creative outcomes happened maybe in the last week, realistically.
Mhm.
But most of the project was much more research led,
Mhm.
and words based, and coming up with, again, the four different teams just came up with sort of individually such extraordinary solutions. But then when it
Mhm.
comes to, so bringing this back to the Better by Design conference yesterday, where the work was exhibited,
Mhm.
alongside, I should mention that there was MA students from NCAD exhibiting, and UCD, but to communicate in an exhibition space, the really, really deep thinking that actually kind of comes
Mhm.
down to kind of convincing images, and some of the best kind of pieces of communication within that. Like we were kind of looking at kind of the CAO and how you might augment that, use the CAO as a way of kind of helping students, and kind of just a quickly altered version of the CAO site with the students' idea kind of embedded in it.
Mhm.
That image was just so much more powerful than
Mm.
and any words. And there was long words, but I suspect nobody,
Mm.
there was only a limited amount of reading happened, but the ideas came across so clearly.
Yeah.
Or this idea of kind of the first time college student, one of the ideas the students came up with was a wall calendar, and just kind of the idea of a government, like, or a student led wall calendar in a busy kitchen communicates
Mhm.
way more than any of the
Yeah.
written ideas that they might have had. So
Mm.
yeah, I think that's going back to kind of your original question, Danielle, like this appetite for doing projects of consequence. The students now are definitely much more socially
Yeah.
engaged than I ever was
Yeah.
as a student. But bigger still, that's probably the world that they're graduating into. I think we haven't said the AI word all
Mhm.
conversation, but I think
Yes.
one of the things that eliminates is some of the, I think it's Kasha Osman said that, like, what AI does is it kind of gets you out the positive spin on it. It kind of gets you out of the weeds and allows you to see, as a designer, to focus on the bigger picture. Now, it's important. I think she cautioned that like it won't make the big decisions for you, but it does strip out a lot of some of the more kind of production based work. So I think what we're definitely teaching the students in IDT now is that it's much more about systems, research led design, collaborating with because that's the other thing that AI does, is it kind of democratizes design. Everyone's a designer now. So I suppose you need to take your design thinking and apply it in a positive way. But I suppose, again, putting a positive spin on this idea and a realization within Irish government that design thinking, and that was definitely kind of the nature of a lot of the conversations yesterday, was this kind of push-pull between policymakers and designers. But I think that the realization is there now, is that kind of design and engineering thinking is very valuable in that space. And also, I suppose, the other thing we hit on in the project with Rob and Genevieve was I think traditionally all governments, not just ours, are quite siloed, departmentally siloed. But for a lot of these systems to work, they need to find ways to work cross departmentally and joining the dots. And I think designers are kind of probably uniquely positioned to be able to see that whole process from end to end, being able to navigate that type of complexity. So look, there's definitely really exciting things happening in an Irish context and globally at the moment. So but it's definitely a different world that this cohort of students are graduating into than me or you graduated into, and they need a slightly different tool set to navigate that.
Oh, completely. And I think what I loved about the Better by Design, and we will have an episode entirely related to it because it was fantastic, which happened yesterday in the Lighthouse, thanks to Creative Ireland and IDI, and Charlotte Barker at the helm of IDI, championing the whole thing. But what I loved about the exhibition was the way in which the projects were articulated, knowing that the audience was not going to be the design community only. And I thought that was actually very clever, because half of the audience that in the breakout sessions, or in the the coffee sessions in between the talks, I chatted to so many people from Department of, and that was quite interesting. They had never been to an event held in a cinema in the first place, so they thought that was quite cool. But then actually just asking their motivations for why they were there was entirely different. So I think that was really, really done very, very well, and I think the projects came across really, really strongly. And I totally take your point. Yes, the students are coming into a completely different world, and the safety of and maybe the security of jobs is not necessarily there with AI, and particularly in those starting positions as junior roles. They're not as plentiful as they have been in times gone by, but not to say it's not. Any of the graduates I met at the end of year shows this year were hugely positive about their careers and their futures, which is a real testament to their resilience. So so real sense of positivity there. But back to you, because it is all about you. I'm joking. So just, I suppose, we're kind of we're kind of getting to some of your other projects. I know there was a project around the Wonder Cabinet. You might just briefly mention that, because I think it's a really fascinating project. And I think it's you might just explain what that is.
Sure, yeah. Again, Wonder Cabinet, building on kind of conversations and friends within the industry. It was also Lawrence Lord and Jeffrey Bolius, who AP&E architects, who were commissioned to do a new exhibit in the Natural History Museum. And again, they got us on board. It was after Free Market. But the idea was to build, building on this kind of research. So the idea of cabinets of curiosity our historic idea, and it was kind of a modern take on that. I can't keep this conversation keeps kind of coming into this the friction between kind of tradition and history and putting a modern spin or trying to interpret that in a modern way. But it was an amazing project to work on. So the museum had come into the possession of some new exhibits that needed to be housed somewhere. So again, just the Natural History Museum is the Dead Zoo, which, you know, just such an extraordinary place. Again, like when I was working on the project, I was kind of having all these memories of in NCAD, drawing was very central. And I think it still is to the course there. We'd be dragged up there every second week, it seemed like, into the museum to draw to draw all everything, the zebras and whatever. But a funny thing happened then. So as part of the build for that, we ended up out in the museum at that moment in time. I don't know if they still maintain the premises, but it was this huge warehouse out on the outskirts near the airport, where it's where they house the exhibits that can't be exhibited, and it's just, it used to be a mobile phone plant, but it's just acres and acres of space and we kind of went in there to see the animal exhibits, but there is a room of all the chariots. There's a room. It's like the Raiders scene in the Raiders of the Lost Ark. There's a room which is just a room of rocks. So any find of archaeological significance that gets submitted to the museum, they can't necessarily all be submitted, but they do need to be catalogued and housed somewhere. So it's just a whole room of every type of rock you can imagine. There was a room of boats that were being kept in salinated water, stinky room with kind of old shipwrecks. But when we were in there looking at the exhibits, I came across this zebra whose head had seemingly fallen off, but I was looking at it closely, and, you know, that experience of drawing in college was like, I know those stripes. the poor zebra is now in two pieces in storage, but yeah, that was really special, just to kind of get a pre-look at what was going into the cabinet. So we had to kind of collaborate with the architecture team to I suppose do the communication design for it, do literally the sign over the door, which in itself, like, kind of sometimes this idea of that was a big project, but sometimes the little things. So we worked to create, so the name of the thing ended up being the Wonder Cabinet, but it had to be bilingual as well, so Cabinet and Niantish in Irish, and the idea was to kind of to mimic, I suppose, the mahogany surroundings of the museum, but the architecture team had built like it was a cube, but above the door the idea was to do the name of the exhibit in lit brass lettering. And that was kind of central from, you know, one of the key tenets from the get-go was always, you know, the brass lettering, and the actual drawing of that lettering. If you're kind of looking at the images of it there, the exhibition itself was based around the idea of predator and prey. So we again, going through the archives there and looking at some of the early drawings for it. Again, this was a collaboration with Owen Cummins, who, it's funny, like, was Owen and myself working on Free Market, and Owen and myself working on the Wonder Cabinet. And we set about trying to draw some of the exhibits first. So there's some lovely illustrations there by Owen of the animals, which, again, this idea of things that got just great stuff that unfortunately got rejected, and I suppose we gravitated more so towards the type. And I suppose, again, this idea of kind of designing for context, when you're in a historic space like that, very precious to everyone, me included, that you know that anything that goes into that space has to be sympathetic to its surroundings. So we were working on kind of a style of Castellan type that we kind of redrew, and we kind of knocked some of the elements out of it, and we did a lot of research on predator teeth, and it's kind of this weird kind of combination of sort of teeth and quite traditional type ended up being the word mark for Wonder Cabinet. But when it came to these threads of thought, this idea of kind of collaboration and different people working on different pieces of the job, we were working with this amazing craftsman, carpenter from Acrewood, and then another supplier, who when the letters came to site, both so the letters were made separately to the carpentry, and the tolerance of both, they had been cut to such precision that the letters basically both were exactly the same size, and the letters didn't quite fit into the app. So the craftsman had cut the apertures for the lettering to slot into, and they were so both pieces were so well made that they didn't fit together. But other parts of kind of the the day to day and the scramble of like being able to jump from, we're talking about type design or web development, to working with it ultimately, there was a little bit of back and forth, and ultimately it was the lettering that had to change. But just working with the sign makers to come up with this way of mounting the letters to upside down onto a router to kind of just trim off a fraction of a millimeter to get them all to slot in. We got it done, and I suppose the effect was beautiful when it landed. And that's we're just talking very superficially about just the sign on the thing inside. I suppose we're kind of talking a little bit about kind of working at scale, working kind of municipally, accessibility. Access would have been a huge priority on that project. Anything that goes into a public museum, you also have to deal with the Official Languages Act. So everything, all of the signage was bilingual. Another lovely little kind of memory or thread of thought on that. Working this idea of just working with collaborators. Often there's kind of I would say this, that there is this perception maybe of other people that when you translate English to Irish, that Irish is considerably longer. I would argue that maybe comes from not laziness exactly, but not really engaging with the text. If you translate properly, sorry, I shouldn't say properly, but if you translate accurately from one language to the other, generally speaking, and sometimes one will be shorter than the other. It's not like they should be roughly of equal length. But we found an amazing translator. The name escapes me now, but who worked with, and again the delicate tightrope of translating, because just the space that we were working in was tight, and the Irish had to match the English pretty closely. This translator worked to get bang on word count translations, but add into the mix the complexity of also translating into the other thing that sometimes happens with translation when you don't it's just done quickly, is that the translated language is not, it's not incorrect, but it's not readable to an average Irish reader, or especially to a child who would have been the kind of target audience of the Wonder Cabinet. So our translator managed to kind of both translate to the same length, but also write the language really beautifully in a way that was kind of intelligible or understandable to kids who would be experiencing the exhibit. So there was that, and then obviously working very closely with the OPW to ensure all of the heritage aspects of the project were met. There was also kind of a health and safety aspect to it. I suppose when you put some of those exhibits, the gas or the units, so they go into glass containers. The glass containers themselves need to be pressurized or kind of decontaminated. There was a jawbone in the cabinet which is 5,000 years old, if I remember that I might be making it a bit older than it was, but like in the order of like a jawbone in the order of thousands and thousands of years old in the cabinet. So you can imagine just the precautions and the I suppose care that has to be taken in order to look after an object like that. So that was just such a joy to work on. But also kind of it illustrates that even in kind of quite a joyful, fun project like that, you're still juggling a lot of complexity, and there's a lot of kind of regulations and things in the brief that need to be met. But I suppose again, like any kind of design, the hard bit is making it look simple.
Exactly.
And with some of these projects today, hopefully, we've achieved that in kind of one way or another.
And I think with that project, because like I have such strong memories as well of the Dead Zoo, and the Dead Zoo is part of, the fabric of Dublin. And like, even the floor, I always remember, like yourself going up there. I used to go up there every Saturday, and I'd be sitting on the floor, the cold
Mm.
parquet floor. I always remember it. You know what I mean? It was such a
Yeah.
visceral thing, and drawing all the animals. And I think everyone was kind of sent there. It was kind of an easy way to
Yeah.
me to kind of improve your drawing skills. But that sensitivity to people's memory of a place is, there's a complexity to that alone, and that's the
Yeah.
intangibility that you're
Mm.
dealing with within the brief as well, that you want to be respectful to what's there, drive it forward, move it on so that it now accommodates that accessibility in terms of the language, the way in which it's written, and then plain Irish rather than plain English.
Uh-huh.
So all of those points brings this project together, and it makes it look effortless, but there's so much at play. And a lot of the work that you guys do, and particularly in detail, you're working with institutions like, IMA, you've done a lot of the, not only teaching with IADT. IMA is the Irish Museum of Modern Art, and IADT is the Institute of Art and Design and Technology in Dún Laoghaire, just for our non-Irish listeners. But, these institutions that you are working with, they have their own history, they have their own idea of like what design is for and what your role within it is. So you're kind of those collaborative partners, you're navigating the relationships between them as much as the job at hand as such. Do you know what I mean? Like, you're kind of doing so many
Yeah.
things at the one time.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's actually an interesting one to pick on, like that kind of both professionally and academically. My entire career has kind of been tangled up in IDT, and yeah, like that's a really fruitful relationship. But again, that notion of kind of IDT maybe going quiet in terms of the studio for a few years, but then the last 2 years we've been super busy with IDT, and that the institute is very very much on the move. So under the stewardship of David Smith, they've just opened the new digital media building, and again we were fortunate enough to be involved in the genesis or the build fit out for that project, and that actually, that project is a good illustration of, I suppose, the environmental work we do in detail, and how we kind of thread from, so that there's quite expressive graphic, like if you walk into that space, there's a mural that Keith Byrne worked on, which goes 3 stories. So in winter, when the whole building is lit up, there's this knotty line, and I suppose the concept was the journey of the idea, so the knotty idea, and as it progresses up to 3 floors, it starts to resolve itself as it goes, and there I suppose the things you see, the visible part of it, the expressive design, but equally that's backed up with all of the formal wayfinding system in the space. So that's I suppose one of the nice things about working in the studio in detail is that we have the capacity to kind of go from kind of the very graphic expressive stuff, but also have the capacity to handle the large scale signage projects. So you kind of get out of, I suppose, that's moving a little bit out of the comfort zone of traditional graphic design, where you're designing maybe a thing in Illustrator, and that's the output and that's the final artwork. When you start moving into scale, you need to start working in, the outputs themselves are still created in Illustrator or whatever your tool of choice is, but then you're much more into kind of automated systems. So we're working with combining graphical data with or graphical output with data, and being able to automate the process of making, we've worked on buildings with literally thousands of signs, and I suppose that's been kind of a learning curve for us over the last couple of years, but we've kind of just been increasing in scale, working with kind of large corporates that I'm probably not allowed to talk to you about, but once you get to that scale, it's huge, and it's a slightly different ball game, but still kind of we kind of delight, I think, in being able to jump from one kind of scale to the other. Brian used to have, and kind of probably still does, there's an image of a small raft and a large oil tanker that Brian used to show as kind of an illustration of Detail Design Studio. And I think even more so now today, that image is so pertinent. So you're kind of, we love being in the weeds, working with kind of small startups on kind of the rush of those kind of little projects, but then also kind of working with much larger organizations. So relating it back to maybe IMA or IADT or other institutions like that. And we do a lot of, like, we work with TCD, and all of these places have their own culture, and they're big, large teams that are kind of changing frequently. So being able to negotiate that kind of pace, that's something we kind of notice working with these different, each institution has a different works at a different pace. And you need to kind of get into the flow of that every different project, and that's maybe kind of the large container ship. You need to be a little bit more content that things take, at a large scale, things take much longer, and you need to just work things kind of incrementally. And if you kind of get into the flow of knowing how things get delivered within those institutions, and just be comfortable with that, and just sort of keep pushing things forward, and not getting frustrated, which as designers we can do, but never losing sight of kind of, I suppose, we're back to kind of knowing the context, knowing the people, and it's it's the relationships you have in those places that help get things done. And I suppose, again, I'd like to think that we're generally a reasonably friendly bunch in the studio, and we tend to get to know these people, and that's very valuable, I suppose, when things do, when things go a little bit pear-shaped. If you have a really tight relationship with clients, and they know you and trust you, you can you can make the person to call to get things sorted. So look, that's a big part of what we do. And I think the difference in jumping from scale, and I think back to maybe IDT, the nuts and bolts signage that maybe nobody notices, and they might be the things that we delight in that they meet, they meet all of the regs. We're working in Braille, they're tactile, all of that good stuff that people maybe gloss over. That's the interesting stuff for us, but you might be distracted by the attention grabbing graphics, which are the fun part sometimes of those jobs.
But it's the quiet things, isn't it, that just allow you to navigate a space, like your wayfinding systems that are effortlessly put together, but they're put together with such thought, and they work. And when they work, people don't see them, and they just assume that they were able to navigate a space or a website or whatever. I knew we were going to speak for hours. I knew it. I knew we would. But I have to ask you one final question. Because the podcast is called Rough Draft, and I'd love to know, do you have anything that is unresolved? Maybe something that you're kind of circling back to that you haven't made yet? Maybe it's a type of client you haven't worked with, a project you'd like to work on, or is there something that's kind of percolating in your brain at the moment?
There's just too many of them, isn't it? There's never enough time to get into all these things.
I'm going to put a gun to your head, and you can give me the top two.
And we're talking professionally here. I mentioned at the very outset that my dad is a furniture designer. That's in me as well. There's all these kind of personal projects and things that I want to make.
But the personal projects are so important because they feed your constant curiosity.
Yeah.
But you can tell us if it's a personal project.
No. We won't go there. We won't bore you with the car that's in multiple pieces that hasn't progressed in a long time. No, seriously though, professionally, I've been fortunate enough to be working with Philip and Radek from the Academy of Art and Architecture Prague. So I hope I got that right. On their project typefix, which is a project or a database to kind of correct the orthography of non-English. So we spoke a lot on this podcast about fadas in the Irish language, but most European languages have their own peculiarities and spellings. I got bailed in to proof or to write the rules, I suppose, for the typographic rules for writing the Irish language, which was a fascinating thing to do. I kind of thought I had a good idea of what it was until you're really in it. You're into weeds and kind of researching that. So that's going along. They presented at A Type By very recently, and that project I think is coming to fruition at the end of 2016. I think there's going to be or 2026. Sorry, 2027. Where am I? And there's also going to be a publication and output from that. And it's, sorry, I didn't even explain it properly. The main output is that it'll be a plugin for InDesign or your chosen web design app. So that's all happening. I'm the Irish type design is always still percolating. I'm working on a piece of research with my brother, Ultan of Grow Architects, at the moment, who are fascinated by the street signage, Dublin street signage at the moment. So we've been researching, compiling a bit of a database of these are the green Irish English road signs around the capital, and there's kind of similar to kind of the insular Michael Biggs project. What sort of style? We can't help ourselves in that. What started as kind of just being research, drawing the various letter forms, morphs obviously into wanting to do your own version. So we've been coming up with all kinds of letter forms for that, the exact output of what they might be. Well, actually, I can put it more straightforward. My brother Ultan is building a house at the moment, and the finishing touch is this idea of the kind of the gable end road sign that we're hopefully going to put some interesting lettering on. And yeah, like I suppose professionally, it's in the studio, it's kind of a crazy time. We're still trying to retool our workflow, and yeah, there's been a huge, like, again, just to touch on the AI question, or the AI in practice, very very present in the studio. We've been, you just have to kind of get on board. And from a personal perspective, I've found myself superpowered by AI, probably more so in a development space. We haven't found really good applications for it in any kind of image making yet. But definitely in terms of kind of research and web development is yeah, in a very interesting place at the moment. But my take on it is very, very positive. We've done more digital design work in the last 3 years than we probably ever have. We can, we can tackle things that before we probably, wouldn't have had necessarily the confidence to do it. So a lot of the emphasis definitely, we've talked a lot about kind of the graphic outputs and some lovely identity stuff. The big experiential design projects are happening, but in my corner of the studio, the digital outputs have been really, really exciting. Tackling, like, we were maybe going to talk today about a project that we did for Dublin College, another beautiful identity by Jess Whelan, but Holly Smith, who's our lead UX designer, we worked on a website for that is in the process of growing even further. But the lovely thing about where we are now and being able to tackle things in the past, sometimes maybe finish on this thread of kind of access to digital systems and accessibility. In the past, you would have been relying maybe on kind of third-party systems, and maybe kind of paying lip service a little bit to that side of the house. For the Dublin College website, we were able to build our own bespoke accessibility plugin for that, which, as far as we're concerned, works way better than any paid for service. And it's very much, again, like these same threads of thought of kind of context. It's customized specifically for that client, for their exact needs, and having full control over being able to develop, again, like the idea of kind of the business card. I'm now banging on about like an accessibility widget that we build. It's the delight in some of those small things. Like the website itself is obviously like, a lovely thing to look at, and very complex in lots of other ways, but just little things like that, being able to, having these conversations with clients about their needs, and particularly kind of around accessibility accessibility, and being able to answer that need in a very, very meaningful, deliberate way, and not just be kind of, oh, you know, we have to comply with this and that. And like, yeah, no, we did some research. We made this made this widget, and it actually, we can kind of quantify its effect on users. So all of that couldn't exist without kind of the modern tools we have at our disposal. And yeah, hopefully it just allows us, you know, I'm really not I'm more and more reassured about it, and that really, as designers, it just opens up so much more possibilities. That same quote again, it gets you out of the weeds and to be able to focus on the big picture, and really delivering, being in full, maybe leave it there on the notion of kind of be in total. It suits somebody like me. I can be in just complete control of the output, which is amazing. So yeah, there you go.
Great. Well, listen, we will have to leave it there. Otherwise, we'll have to put this into a two-part podcast. But I actually genuinely could speak to you for much, much longer. But I just want to say thank you so much. It's great to see that kind of whistle stop tour of the projects that you do, and the vast spread of, you know, context within which you work. You don't have a 30-year career. It's a short enough career to have had so much experience in so many different areas. So yeah, it's wonderful, and I thank you so much for sharing. So I'll leave on Go Raibh Maith Agat, and for our non-Irish speakers, that's thank you.
I'll find you out, Danielle.
If you liked that episode, don't forget to like and subscribe. You can also watch the videos over on Spotify and YouTube, and go to our Patreon channel to see more podcasts, live content and case studies. Just search Bounce Creative.